State and territory leaders are set to lock horns with the Prime Minister over border closures at today's National Cabinet, with a plan for coronavirus hotspots to be debated. Scott Morrison wants the states and territories to agree to a national definition of high-risk areas. The plan would allow movement across borders before Christmas. New South Wales and Victoria are willing to consider the idea, but other states, especially Queensland and Western Australia, are holding firm.
Australia's international border is also likely to be discussed, with the Commonwealth under pressure to lift the cap on arrivals that has left thousands of Australians stranded overseas. Lots to talk about this morning. Noor Haider is at Parliament House. Stephanie Ferrier is in Melbourne. Antoinette Collins in Sydney. Good morning to all of you. Noor, starting with you, a big agenda for today's National Cabinet meeting.
Yeah, good morning, Michael. A lot to discuss today. The Prime Minister has previously made it very clear that he wants state and territory leaders to lift as many COVID-19 restrictions as possible before Christmas. Now, last month, the nation's chief health and medical officers were asked to come up with a definition for a coronavirus hotspot. It's expected that the Prime Minister will today put forward his proposal to state and territory leaders at National Cabinet. His aim, his hope is that having a nationally consistent definition will help guide states when they're imposing lockdowns or when they're putting into effect border restrictions. Now, it does seem that this exercise is likely to fail. We're not expecting all state and territory leaders to agree or to sign on to this. There are some states with particularly stringent views as to when their borders will come down. We've heard from the Queensland government. It doesn't want to bring its southern border with New South Wales down until there's more than 28 days free of COVID-19. The Premier in WA, Mark McGowan, also very clear that he won't be bringing down his state border anytime soon. The Prime Minister, however, says that the Commonwealth will be going ahead with its own definition, irrespective of whether or not states sign on to it. But there are other issues that will be discussed at National Cabinet today. The issue of a code for agriculture workers. So the government has warned that state border restrictions are hampering the free movement of agriculture workers between states. The government says that could lead to the cost of fresh produce going up. So that's an issue that the Agriculture Minister David Littleproud wants resolved at today's National Cabinet. But as you mentioned, the issue of caps on the number of international arrivals is also going to be discussed. At this stage, there is a cap of 4,000 people allowed back into the country each week. Now, that cap was imposed to sort of ease the burden on the nation's hotel quarantine systems when we saw that outbreak or that second outbreak occur in Melbourne. Now, it's not likely that the state leaders will agree to immediately lift this cap, but it will be an issue for discussion today, Michael.
Well, indeed, Noor, thank you. Stephanie Ferrier. Victorians are anxiously awaiting details of the Premier's roadmap to eventually take the state out of lockdown.
Hi, Michael. Yes, all will be revealed on Sunday, so no doubt many dads will be glued to the box on Father's Day to find out exactly how we're coming out of these tough Stage 4 restrictions here in Melbourne and the Stage 3 lockdowns in regional Victoria. Now, there'll be two roadmaps for both areas because regional Victoria wasn't affected as badly in this second wave. The Premier once again refused to be drawn on the details of these roadmaps, and once again he says he can't rule out extending these tough Stage 4 lockdowns beyond September the 13th. Now, in order for us to get this path out to what he calls a new COVID normal, infection rates are going to have to come down. And so the mood was a little glum yesterday when we went back up to over 100 new cases. Yesterday it was up to 113. There were another 15 deaths, although 9 of those were historical cases from aged care centres that were only just added to the figures. So it's nearly the weekend and soon we will be learning our fate after these lockdowns that feel like they've dragged on forever. Hopefully it's not too much of a rocky path out.
Hopefully not. Stephanie, thank you. Antoinette Collins, finally to you. The border battle between New South Wales and Queensland is certainly heating up.
It certainly is, Michael. Well, at least the two premiers have actually spoken to each other now after Gladys Berejiklian accused Anastasia Palaszczuk of not returning her phone calls. Gladys Berejiklian says she had a polite and constructive conversation with the Queensland Premier, centred mostly around trying to allow doctors and physicians easier access across the border. There are many towns in northern New South Wales that rely on GPs, for example, from Queensland to come and visit their towns, and they haven't seen a GP for many weeks. weeks now. But for Queensland, before they open the border, they want to see 0 cases of community transmission for 28 days in New South Wales. Now, Gladys Berejiklian says that's a pretty tall order given the size of our population, and the last time that actually happened in the pandemic was only for 2 weeks in the middle of June. So Gladys Berejiklian is saying that, New South Wales health authorities are staying on top of outbreaks here in New South Wales, and that despite all their efforts, during a pandemic, there is always the risk.
Transmission rates of unknown cases are very low. Most of the cases we've had today and previous days have been from known sources. The target they're giving us is pretty much unachievable.
There might be some better news for a lot of people, though, in the southern border region today, with that border bubble expanding on the New South Wales Victorian border from 2.5 kilometres to a 50-kilometre zone. So that will allow a bit more access across the southern border. And health authorities here in New South Wales might decide today or tomorrow whether or not they'll lift health advice banning people from metropolitan Sydney and the Central Coast from visiting aged care facilities. Now, that was put in place when cases of locally acquired community transmission were going up, and there were fears that the CBD cluster would sort of really take hold in aged care facilities. That hasn't eventuated to the extent that they were fearful of, so the health authorities might decide to overturn that particular ban in time for Father's Day. New South Wales recorded just 12 new cases yesterday, and 9 of those are locally acquired, but most of them are connected to known clusters.
OK, Antoinette, Stephanie Knorr, thank you all. Meanwhile, a major think tank says Australia must aim for 0 cases of coronavirus to give the economy the best chance to recover. A report out this morning from the Grattan Institute says maintaining restrictions is essential to protect the vulnerable and avoid repeated shutdowns of businesses. It says tight restrictions cause short-term pain, but will also help build confidence when they are eventually eased.
You need a clear goal, a goal to aim for zero active cases. But you also need to say we can actually, when numbers get really low consistently, we can actually start to open up.
National Cabinet is set to debate the cap on returning travellers. Over recent weeks, we've heard harrowing tales of Australians stuck overseas. One of the major hurdles is the spiralling cost of return tickets. And in response, the government's announced one-off loans of $2,000 for singles or $5,000 for affected families. Only 4,000 people are allowed into the country each week, and that means airlines are having to cap the number allowed on their flights.
Now, there are currently 23,000 Australians overseas who have told the government, yes, they want to come home, but because of the cap, thousands of people have had their economy tickets either cancelled or delayed, and for many, the only option now is to purchase expensive business or even first-class tickets worth tens of thousands of dollars. And that immense cost comes before people have had to pay for 2 weeks of hotel quarantine, and that alone costs at least $3,000.
So we've had a lot of people contact us about this, and we've spoken to a couple of them. Ziggy Driscoll is stuck in the Netherlands after travelling there to care for her sick mum, while Matthew Shaw is stuck in the UK. And we asked them whether the government loans would help them.
So those type of people that need to get a flight are in dire situations. They are going to be helped by this. To be honest with you, I don't even think I would be eligible to apply for it, because the only reason I'm going home is to not overstay my visa. And I understand why it's been done, that the system can only take so much pressure. But I mean, we over here can only take so much pressure. I mean, it's about supporting all citizens at home and overseas. And remove the cap. I'm happy to sit in a hotel for 14 days. I'm happy to pay for it. Like that was a challenge I had to get over, was just paying for the quarantine. But now there's another thing to contend with. And again, like I said, we can only take so much. So I think it's time to let those processes that you've put in place be enacted.
I feel like, giving out loans is just going to put people further into debt, and it's not really actually helping the situation. Like it's, a bit of a band-aid solution and not a very good one. The amounts that they're offering after the conversion rate to euros wouldn't even cover the normal cost of a flight back to Australia, let alone the inflated prices that we're currently looking at. I feel like, maybe it's a little bit insulting to like all of the Australians who are trying to get home, just to kind of be like, oh, we can give you a small loan if you're eligible for it, and then, just work it out yourself. For me personally, I didn't, have the option to come back sooner. I tried to come back as soon as I knew that I was going to. I feel like I made the right decision, because otherwise there would have been no one to take care of my mother and grandmother. Then to be told, that I can't come home and I shouldn't and I should have known better, I think that is quite frustrating.
Ziggy and Matthew, as you mentioned, Lisa, so many people contacting us. You would have seen other people in various parts of the world telling us about their plight. Lots of your comments coming in this morning. We've heard from Vanessa, who lives in New York City, and she says, my second economy flight to Sydney was cancelled today as airlines consolidate their flights. I can book the next week on the same carrier, but for more than $8,000 only for a business class seat. And now I'm up for $3,000 in quarantine fees as well, as it's after the cut-off date. Vanessa says the situation is just ridiculous.
Yeah, interesting one from Leslie, who says, look, I know your focus today is on Australians unable to get back here, but it's equally upsetting for those who can't leave. Leslie says she's got a 94-year-old mother in Scotland, and it's an ever more likely possibility that I'll never get to see her again.
Tragic. Thomas says, I've lived overseas for several years. Returning to Australia could put my visa status at risk, but even if that wasn't an issue, I simply could not afford the cost of those flights or the quarantine fees. I'm definitely not living it up and having fun without thought as to the consequences, just trying to live my life as normally as I can. In these circumstances, it is tough for the whole world right now. And Thomas makes a very interesting point. He finishes by saying, I'm always amazed at how many vitriolic, judgmental comments there are whenever we speak about this. And we've copped it already from some people out there this morning. The general tenor of those sort of comments are, screw you. You're overseas, you've had every opportunity to come home. That is not the case for everybody. For family reasons, kids in local schools, jobs, rental leases, other ties. It is just not as easy as it was for other people to, back in March, are able to say, right, we're pulling up stumps, we're going to fly home.
Hey, send your emails and your comments. We'd love you to join the conversation. We'll keep going with this.
Now, on Sunday, Victorians are expected to learn what life will be like after lockdown.
It's been a tough time for the state's business sector, and to hear more, Madeline joins us now from Melbourne's western suburbs.
Lisa, Michael, good morning to you. Yes, I'm out in Brooklyn, which is one of the manufacturing hubs here in Melbourne. And as you say, we're coming up on 5 weeks now of stage 4 restrictions in Melbourne and wider Victoria. So many businesses have had to close down, and we are all eagerly awaiting the government's roadmap out of lockdown, how those restrictions are going to be lifted. The Premier is going to outline that on Sunday. What does seem apparent is that there's going to be some sort of traffic light system, but we're still very much eagerly waiting for those details. And what is abundantly clear is that so many businesses here in this state are barely hanging on. Now, there were some businesses that were able to stay open, certainly construction, food for takeaway, and some manufacturing. Now, one business that was able to stay open is where I am now at the moment. It's Woods Furniture. They make furniture for schools, and they've been here for 60 years or so. Tony Rogers is the managing director of the business. Great to speak to you, Tony. Thanks for being here. Now, look, one of the restrictions that was placed on you, you are just able to stay open because you make furniture for schools. Otherwise, you would have had to have closed down. But you are operating with a staff of 2/3. How's that working?
Look, it's been difficult. We're currently in a situation where we are getting orders. It's a matter of being able to just keep things ticking over. However, if we do not reopen and start getting back to full capacity by the end of September, it's going to become very difficult. Look, first and foremost, health and safety is our number one priority. We want to help get Victorian businesses and the industry back up and running. But at the same time, we're competing against Chinese imports on a regular basis, and if we're not back to our full capacity within the next few weeks, we are going to start to struggle, and it will continue to open the door. The Victorian government talks about wanting to support local business. If they do not assist and give us a clear guideline on how to get back up and running and allow us to operate, albeit under a safe COVID plan, it's going to become more and more difficult.
Yeah, you've had a really safe and strong COVID plan from the beginning. So this blanket rule of 2/3 capacity was applied across the board. But looking at you here, you have a huge space. Now, if we talk about something like restaurants, they have a square meterage rule. Do you think it would be fair and reasonable for those limits on your staff to actually continue, given your space here?
No, it should be based on the square meterage. As you suggested, we do have a vast space here. We've got all the processes in place to be able to operate safely. Our number one priority is to the workers. And probably more concerning at the moment than COVID is the mental health and well-being of all our staff.
So what are you looking for in terms of a signal and what you want from the government on Sunday?
We would like clear clarification and the opportunity to be able to continue to operate safely. And that is under the COVID Safe Plan. Every business that's currently operating in Victoria is operating under that safe plan. We've put a lot of work into it. From day one, we feel we've been ahead of the curve. Everything, in fact, a lot of the procedures we've put in place were done prior to the recommendations from the government. So we're taking this very serious.
And just really briefly, how confident are you that Victoria can get back on its feet?
Only time will tell.
All right, Tony, not a very confident way to end from you, but thank you very much for speaking with us this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Michael and Lisa, I think that the clarity and the certainty is the message that has been coming from business leaders just so strongly. They just want to know what the roadmap looks like, and that's what they're hoping to get on Sunday.
48 hours to go and counting. Madeline, thank you so much for that.